The briefing room fell dead silent when Captain Reese Venom Kestrel stood up. 23 Navy SEALs, Delta Force operators, and Marine raiders had been lounging in their chairs, some cracking jokes about the desk jockey pilots who'd be providing air support for Operation Nightfall. The laughter died instantly when they saw her rise from the back corner where she'd been sitting in shadow, her flight suit bearing patches they couldn't quite read in the dim light. "Ma'am, I said combat pilots," Captain Marcus Torres repeated, his voice carrying that particular brand of condescension reserved for what he assumed was a logistics officer who'd wandered into the wrong briefing. The other operators shifted uncomfortably, some suppressing smirks. They'd seen plenty of pilots, cocky Top Gun wannabes who talked big until the bullets started flying. But a woman. In a room full of America's most elite warriors preparing for a Black Ops mission, deep in enemy territory. Kestrel didn't speak. She simply walked forward, her boots making no sound on the concrete floor. As she moved into the harsh fluorescent light, the patches on her flight suit became visible. The operators' expressions began to change. Thunderbolt II Squadron insignia, combat air medal with 3 oak leaf clusters. And there, on her left shoulder, a patch most of them had only heard whispered about in the darkest corners of military lore, the unofficial emblem of the pilots who flew missions that officially never happened. "Call sign Venom," she said quietly, her voice carrying a weight that made the room feel smaller. 347 combat sorties, 18 confirmed kills, 0 friendly fire incidents. She paused, letting her eyes scan the room. "And I've been flying combat missions since before half of you learned to shave." Torres felt heat creep up his neck. He'd done his homework on every operator in the room, memorized their service records, their capabilities, their kill counts. But somehow, intel had failed to mention that their close air support would be coming from a ghost, someone whose missions were so classified that even his security clearance couldn't access them. "The target is a fortified compound 12 clicks inside hostile territory," Kestrel continued, moving to the tactical display without invitation. "AAA batteries, shoulder-fired missiles, and approximately 200 enemy combatants who have been dug in for months. You need someone who can thread the needle between your position and theirs without turning you into paste." Her finger traced the satellite image with surgical precision. "And Captain Torres, you're going to need me to do it in complete radio silence for the first 15 minutes of your insertion." The room remained silent, but the quality of that silence had changed. It was no longer skeptical. It was the silence of professionals recognizing someone who belonged at the table. Outside, storm clouds gathered over the base, and somewhere in the distance, an A-10's twin engines began their distinctive whistle, preparing for a mission that would either make legends or create ghosts. The first drops of rain hit the windows as Kestrel began outlining a flight plan that would rewrite everything they thought they knew about close air support. In 6 hours, they would discover why they called her Venom. In 12 hours, some of them wouldn't be coming home. But in this moment, in this room, they were about to witness the birth of a legend that would echo through military circles for decades to come. Torres cleared his throat and gestured to the front of the room. For the first time in his career, he was about to hand over tactical command to a pilot. "The floor is yours, Captain Kestrel." The transformation was complete, from skepticism to respect in the span of 3 minutes. But respect was only the beginning. What they were about to see would transcend respect and enter the realm of awe. The storm outside intensified, matching the electricity building inside the briefing room. Operation Nightfall was about to begin, and none of them, not even Venom herself, could anticipate how this mission would change everything they thought they knew about warfare, sacrifice, and the thin line between heroism and legend. The official record would list it as a routine extraction. The truth was something else entirely. Captain Kestrel moved to the tactical display, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface with the fluid precision of someone who'd spent more time studying enemy positions than most operators spent in actual combat. The satellite imagery showed a compound that looked like a fortress, concrete walls 3 feet thick, watchtowers at each corner, and a maze of trenches connecting bunkers that had been reinforced over months of preparation. Intelligence suggested the high-value target was being held in the central building, but intel also suggested a lot of things that turned out to be catastrophically wrong. "Here's what your briefing didn't tell you," Kestrel began, highlighting sections of the compound in red. "These aren't just defensive positions. They're designed to funnel attacking forces into kill zones specifically engineered for maximum casualties." She zoomed in on what appeared to be empty courtyards. "These open areas, they're crossfire zones. Anyone moving through them will be engaged from at least 4 different positions simultaneously." Staff Sergeant Maya Volkov, the team's designated marksman, leaned forward. "How do you know this?" Her Russian accent carried skepticism, but also curiosity. She'd studied enough tactical layouts to recognize expertise when she saw it. Kestrel's smile was cold as winter steel. "Because I've been watching this compound for 3 weeks. Every guard rotation, every supply run, every time someone takes a smoke break. I know which guard in Tower 3 is left-handed, and I know that the generator in the basement makes a specific sound when it's about to fail." She paused, letting that sink in. "I also know that your intelligence is 12 hours old, which in tactical terms makes it ancient history." The operators exchanged glances. This wasn't standard procedure. Pilots weren't supposed to conduct reconnaissance missions alone, weren't supposed to have intelligence that superseded official channels. But the detail in her briefing suggested something far beyond routine preparation. "What aren't you telling us?" Torres asked, his voice carrying the weight of command responsibility. He'd led enough classified operations to recognize when information was being compartmentalized, and he'd lost enough good soldiers to incomplete intelligence to demand transparency. Kestrel's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes, a shadow of memory, perhaps, or the ghost of decisions that couldn't be unmade. "I'm telling you everything you need to complete the mission and bring your people home alive," she replied. "The rest is above your clearance level." The room tensed. In the special operations community, clearance levels were sacred boundaries, but they were also excuses that got people killed. Torres had to make a decision: trust the pilot with classified knowledge, or demand answers that might compromise the mission before it began. "With respect, Captain," Volkov interjected, "we've all bled for clearance levels. If you're asking us to walk into that compound based on intelligence we can't verify, we need more than your word." Her hand rested casually near her sidearm, not threatening, but making a point about trust and consequences. The rain outside had intensified, drumming against the windows with increasing urgency. In the distance, aircraft engines were spinning up for pre-flight checks, the sound carrying through the storm like mechanical thunder. Time was running short, and the weight of command decisions pressed down on everyone in the room like the approaching weather front. Kestrel looked around the room, studying faces that had seen too much combat to be impressed by classified mystique. These weren't academy graduates or politicians playing war games. They were operators who'd earned their positions through blood and competence, and they deserved better than bureaucratic deflection. Captain Torres felt the familiar weight of leadership settling on his shoulders like a tactical vest loaded with ammunition. Every decision in the next few minutes would ripple through the lives of his team, their families, and the success of a mission that could shift the balance of power in a region that had been bleeding for decades. The high-value target wasn't just another enemy combatant. Intelligence suggested he possessed information that could prevent terrorist attacks on American soil, information that would die with him if the extraction failed. "Captain Kestrel," he said finally, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd made life-and-death decisions in a dozen different countries, "my team has earned the right to know what they're walking into. Clearance levels are bureaucratic constructs. Bullets don't respect classification stamps." He stood up, matching her intensity with his own. If you want us to trust you with our lives, you need to trust us with the truth." The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, ready to snap under the pressure of competing loyalties, duty to classified protocols versus responsibility to the operators who would execute the mission. Kestrel's training demanded she maintain operational security at all costs. Her conscience demanded she give these warriors every advantage possible to survive what was coming. "The compound has been reinforced with materials that don't appear on any of your satellite imagery," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Concrete mixed with metallic fragments designed to deflect precision-guided munitions. The guard towers have been equipped with electronic warfare systems that can jam our communications within a 3-kilometer radius. And the central building where your target is being held has been rigged with enough explosives to level a city block." The implications hit the room like a physical force. Volkov's hand moved away from her sidearm as the tactical reality settled in. This wasn't just a difficult extraction. It was a suicide mission disguised as routine operations. "Jesus Christ," muttered Corporal Jake Reaper Morrison, the team's explosive ordnance specialist. "How long have you known about this?" His question carried accusation and disbelief in equal measure. "3 weeks," Kestrel replied without hesitation. "I've been trying to find an approach vector that doesn't get you all killed. I think I found one, but it requires precision flying in weather conditions that will ground every other pilot on this base." She gestured toward the windows where rain was now falling in sheets, driven horizontal by winds that were approaching dangerous levels. Torres processed the information with the cold calculation of someone who'd survived by making rational decisions under impossible circumstances. The mission parameters had just changed from difficult to potentially catastrophic, but the importance of the target remained unchanged. American lives hung in the balance, and political considerations meant aborting wasn't an option. "What's your plan?" he asked, accepting the new reality with the stoicism that defined professional soldiers. Kestrel moved back to the tactical display, her movements now carrying urgency that matched the intensifying storm outside. "Low-level approach, using the storm as cover. I can get under their radar, but it means flying at altitudes that will put me well within range of everything they can throw at me." Her fingers traced a flight path that seemed to thread between every defensive position. "You'll have a 15-minute window to reach the target building before their electronics come back online." The plan was audacious, bordering on insane, requiring flying skills that pushed the boundaries of what was possible in an A-10 Thunderbolt. The aircraft, affectionately known as the Warthog, was built for close air support, but not for the kind of precision flying Kestrel was describing. Storm clouds continued building outside the briefing room windows, and the base weather station was reporting conditions that would normally ground all but the most essential flights. Wind gusts approaching 40 knots, visibility dropping to near zero, and atmospheric pressure falling rapidly. Perfect conditions for a stealth approach, if you were skilled enough to fly in weather that would challenge the most experienced pilots. Kestrel pulled up meteorological data on the tactical display, overlaying wind patterns and precipitation density onto the satellite imagery of the target compound. The storm would provide cover, but it would also create turbulence that could slam an aircraft into the ground without warning. Flying low-level in those conditions would require split-second reactions and an intimate understanding of how weather interacted with terrain. "The storm front is moving northeast at approximately 20 knots, she explained, highlighting the meteorological data with laser precision. "If we time the insertion correctly, the heaviest precipitation will be directly over the compound during your approach. Their thermal imaging will be compromised, their acoustic detection will be masked by thunder, and their visual observation will be effectively eliminated." Staff Sergeant Chen Wei, the team's communications specialist, studied the electronic warfare overlay with the intensity of someone whose life depended on maintaining contact with command. "What about our communications during the blackout period? If something goes wrong?" Then you adapt and overcome, Kestrel interrupted, using the military phrase that every special operator knew by heart. I'll maintain radio silence until you're in position, then provide close air support as needed. But for the first 15 minutes, you're on your own. The weight of that statement settled over the room like a blanket. 15 minutes might not seem like much time, but in combat it could feel like hours. Tors looked around the room, studying the faces of operators who'd volunteered for missions that officially didn't exist. Each of them had families, dreams, plans for life after military service. Each of them also understood that some missions required sacrifices that couldn't be measured in statistics or after-action reports. "Gear up," he said simply. "We launch in 90 minutes." The decision made, there was no point in dwelling on variables they couldn't control. The mission would succeed or fail based on training, skill, and a little bit of luck. Everything else was just noise. As the operators filed out to collect their equipment, Kestrel remained behind, staring at the tactical display with an intensity that suggested she was seeing something the others had missed. Tors paused at the door, instinct telling him there was still information he needed. "Captain," he said quietly, "what makes you so sure you can pull this off?" It wasn't doubt in her abilities. Her service record spoke for itself. It was curiosity about the confidence she projected despite the overwhelming tactical challenges. Kestrel's reflection wavered on the darkened window as she continued studying the mission parameters. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of experiences that couldn't be shared in official reports. "Because I've flown this exact mission before, Captain Tors. Different compound, different country, different war, but the same impossible odds and the same stakes." She turned to face him, and for the first time he could see the full weight of what she'd been carrying. "The difference is that last time, I didn't have operators of your caliber on the ground. Last time, good people died because I wasn't good enough." The admission hung between them like a challenge to fate itself. Tors understood the weight of command failures, the way they shaped every subsequent decision with the memory of what could go wrong. But he also recognized the dangerous edge that came from trying to redeem past mistakes through present actions. "This isn't about redemption," he said carefully. "This is about completing the mission and bringing everyone home." It was a reminder as much as a statement. Successful operations required clear thinking, not emotional baggage. "Understood," Kestrel replied, but something in her expression suggested that for her, the two weren't mutually exclusive. The mission would succeed, but success would also quiet voices that had been haunting her for longer than anyone in this room could imagine. Outside, the storm had reached full intensity, and the sound of rain against the windows provided a soundtrack to the preparations taking place across the base. Aircraft were being prepped for conditions that pushed the boundaries of safe flight parameters. Weapons were being loaded with precision that matched the tactical requirements, and operators were making final checks on equipment that would determine the difference between success and catastrophe. The next 6 hours would test everything they'd trained for, everything they believed about themselves and each other. In military terms, it was just another mission. In human terms, it was the kind of night that either made legends or broke careers. Time would tell which one Operation Nightfall would become. The armory buzzed with controlled energy as the Special Operations Team conducted final equipment checks with the methodical precision that separated elite units from conventional forces. Each operator moved through their pre-mission ritual with practiced efficiency: weapons cleaning, ammunition counting, communications testing, and the thousand small preparations that could mean the difference between success and failure in hostile territory. Staff Sergeant Volkov field-stripped her custom rifle for the third time, her fingers finding every component by muscle memory while her mind ran through engagement scenarios. The weapon was an extension of herself, configured specifically for long-range precision in adverse conditions. Tonight, those conditions would test both the rifle and the shooter beyond normal parameters. "Scope covers," Corporal Morrison asked, checking his demolition kit with the care of someone who understood that explosives demanded respect. His equipment included shaped charges, det cord, and electronic timers, enough destructive power to level buildings or create precisely controlled breaches, depending on tactical requirements. Ceramic-coated lenses, Volkov replied without looking up from her rifle. Rain won't affect visibility, but the electronic warfare systems Kestrel mentioned might interfere with the range-finding electronics. She paused her cleaning to meet Morrison's eyes, which means old-school marksmanship if things go sideways. Across the armory, Sergeant Chen Wei was programming backup frequencies into multiple radio systems, creating redundant communication networks that could function even under heavy electronic interference. The prospect of 15 minutes without air support demanded flawless coordination between team members, hand signals, pre-planned movement patterns, and split-second timing that left no room for misunderstanding. Captain Torres supervised the preparations while conducting his own mental rehearsal of the mission timeline. Infantry operations required balancing dozens of variables simultaneously: weather conditions, enemy strength, extraction routes, ammunition conservation, casualty evacuation procedures, and contingency plans for when everything went wrong. The addition of electronic warfare and explosive booby traps added layers of complexity that pushed tactical planning into uncharted territory. Torres. The voice belonged to Colonel Rebecca Nash, the base commander whose authorization had made Operation Nightfall possible. She appeared in the armory doorway with the bearing of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected hundreds of lives. "Walk with me." They stepped into the corridor, away from the controlled chaos of mission preparation. Nash had commanded special operations for 15 years, long enough to recognize when missions carried risks that extended beyond acceptable parameters. The weather conditions alone should have grounded the operation, but intelligence indicated the target would be moved within 24 hours. This was the only window. "Sir," Torres waited for guidance that might change everything he'd been planning for the past 4 hours. "Captain Kestrel," Nash said without preamble, "what do you know about her background?" The question carried implications that extended beyond routine personnel inquiries. Torres considered his response carefully. Service record indicates extensive combat experience, high mission success rate, and classified operations dating back 8 years. Beyond that, I know she's the best close air support pilot available for tonight's conditions. It was a professional assessment that avoided speculation about information above his clearance level. Nash nodded slowly, her expression carrying the weight of knowledge that couldn't be shared but needed to be considered. She volunteered for this mission, Torres, specifically requested it when she learned about the target location. The implication hung between them like a loaded weapon. I want you to understand that her motivations might extend beyond standard duty obligations. The revelation added another variable to Torres' tactical calculations. Personal motivations in combat operations could be either advantageous, providing extra determination, or dangerous, leading to reckless decisions that endangered the entire team. Without knowing the specifics of Kestrel's connection to the mission, he couldn't predict which way it would go. "Understood, sir," he replied. "Any guidance on how to handle that information?" "Complete the mission, bring your people home, and keep an eye on your air support," Nash said. "She's the best pilot we have for these conditions, but the best pilots sometimes take risks that extend beyond mission parameters." It was command wisdom earned through years of balancing tactical requirements against human nature. The storm outside intensified as they spoke, wind gusts rattling the building's reinforced windows and driving rain across the tarmac in horizontal sheets. Flight operations had been suspended for all but essential missions, creating an eerie quiet on a base that normally buzzed with constant aircraft activity. 30 minutes to takeoff, Nash announced, checking her watch against the mission timeline. "Weather's going to get worse before it gets better, which means your window is closing fast." She paused, studying tours with the intensity of someone evaluating leadership under pressure. You ready for this? It was a question that encompassed more than tactical preparation. Nash was asking about the weight of command, the burden of making decisions that would determine whether 7 operators returned home or became names on a memorial wall. Tours had carried that weight before, but it never became easier, just more familiar. Yes, sir, he replied with conviction earned through previous missions, where everything had gone wrong and leadership had made the difference between catastrophe and survival. We're ready. The flight line was a study in controlled chaos, as ground crews prepared aircraft for operations that pushed safety margins to their absolute limits. Captain Kestrel's A-10 Thunderbolt II sat under portable hangar covers that provided minimal protection from the driving rain, its twin engines gleaming with moisture that would normally ground any aircraft attempting close air support missions. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez, the crew chief responsible for Kestrel's aircraft, conducted his final inspection with the thoroughness of someone who'd seen too many pilots die from mechanical failures that could have been prevented. Every rivet, every system, every component that could affect flight safety received scrutiny that bordered on obsessive. Hydraulics check, flight controls check, weapons systems armed and ready, Rodriguez called out over the wind, his voice carrying the authority of 30 years maintaining aircraft in impossible conditions. Captain, she's as ready as she'll ever be, but I've got to tell you, these conditions are beyond anything in the manual. Kestrel nodded, already suited up in flight gear designed for survival in hostile environments. Her helmet bore scuff marks from previous missions, and her flight suit carried patches from squadrons that officially didn't exist. She moved around the aircraft with ritualistic precision, conducting her own inspection that complemented the crew chief's technical evaluation. Engine intake screens clear, landing gear secure, ammunition load verified, she murmured, checking items from a mental list developed over hundreds of combat sorties. The A-10's distinctive features, its massive GAU-8 cannon, its ability to absorb battle damage, its reputation for bringing pilots home when other aircraft would have been lost, provided reassurance in conditions that would challenge any pilot's skills. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said quietly, moving close enough to speak without shouting over the wind, "I've been maintaining combat aircraft for 3 decades. I've never seen weather conditions like this combined with a mission profile like what you're planning." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Are you sure about this?" The question came from professional concern, not doubt in her abilities. Rodriguez had watched Kestrel prepare for dozens of missions, had seen her return from flights that should have been impossible. But tonight felt different. The combination of weather, enemy defenses, and tactical complexity created a scenario that existed at the very edge of what was survivable. Kestrel's response was quiet but carried absolute conviction. "Chief, I've been flying combat missions in weather that wasn't supposed to exist, against enemies who weren't supposed to be there, to complete objectives that officially never happened." She looked up at the storm clouds that seemed to press down on the base like a physical weight. "Tonight isn't different from any of those missions. It's just the one that matters most." The explanation satisfied Rodriguez's professional concerns while raising personal ones. In his experience, when pilots started talking about missions that mattered most, they were usually preparing for flights from which they didn't expect to return. He'd learned not to ask questions that couldn't be answered, but he'd also learned to recognize when someone was saying goodbye. "Good hunting, Captain," he said simply, stepping back to allow final preparations. "Bring her home in one piece." It was both a professional request and a personal prayer, the kind of blessing that ground crews offered to pilots who flew missions beyond the edge of maps. The operations center hummed with activity as controllers coordinated the complex dance of aircraft, weather monitoring, and communication protocols that would support Operation Nightfall. Multiple screens displayed satellite imagery, meteorological data, and electronic warfare signatures that painted a picture of tactical conditions changing by the minute. Major Patricia Hawk, the senior air traffic controller, monitored weather data with the intensity of someone whose decisions would determine whether aircraft returned safely to base. Wind speeds were approaching the maximum limits for A-10 operations, and visibility was dropping toward zero, conditions that would normally result in an automatic mission abort. Current conditions at target area: winds gusting to 45 knots, visibility less than half a kilometer, precipitation heavy and continuous, she announced to the operations center. These parameters are beyond normal flight safety margins. It was a professional assessment that carried implications for everyone involved in the mission. Colonel Nash stood behind the controller stations, monitoring the same data while weighing operational requirements against aircrew safety. The balance was delicate: abort the mission and lose the only opportunity to capture a high-value target whose information could save American lives, or proceed with conditions that increased the risk of losing both the aircraft and the special operations team on the ground. Captain Kestrel, Operations Center, Nash spoke into her headset, opening communication with the pilot conducting final pre-flight checks. Current weather conditions are marginal for your mission profile. Request your assessment of flight safety parameters. The response came back immediately, Kestrel's voice clear despite the storm noise in the background. Operations: I've reviewed all weather data and conducted visual assessment of conditions. Flight parameters are within acceptable margins for mission completion. There was a pause before she added, I am prepared to execute as briefed. Nash recognized the formal language of a pilot accepting responsibility for a flight that pushed beyond normal safety margins. It was the kind of communication that appeared in official reports when missions required extraordinary measures, the verbal equivalent of signing a document acknowledging exceptional risk. Understood, Venom, Nash replied, using Kestrel's call sign for the first time that night. You are cleared for mission execution. Good luck. The words carried weight beyond their simple meaning. They were an acknowledgement that success would require skill, courage, and the kind of luck that couldn't be planned or predicted. Across the base, 7 Special Operations soldiers completed their final preparations in an atmosphere of controlled tension that every experienced warrior recognized. Equipment had been checked, rechecked, and checked again. Mission parameters had been memorized, contingency plans rehearsed, and personal effects secured with the methodical care of people who understood that some missions allowed no margin for error. The sound of jet engines spinning up cut through the storm noise, signaling the beginning of Operation Nightfall. In military terms, it was just another classified mission among thousands conducted every year around the world. In human terms, it was the kind of night that would be remembered by everyone involved for the rest of their lives, however long those lives might be. Torres led his team across the rain-soaked tarmac toward the transport helicopter that would carry them to the insertion point. The aircraft, a modified Black Hawk configured for special operations, sat with rotors spinning and crew chiefs making final systems checks. Its dull black paint absorbed light and sound, making it nearly invisible against the storm-darkened sky. Each operator carried approximately 60 pounds of specialized equipment: weapons, ammunition, communications gear, medical supplies, and the tools of their individual specialties. The weight was distributed with precision developed through years of combat experience, every item positioned for quick access under stress conditions. Radio check, Chen Wei announced over the team's communication system, verifying that all operators could maintain contact despite the electronic interference already being generated by the storm. Each voice came back clear and professional, indicating that their hardened communication systems were functioning within parameters. Weapons check, Volkov added, ensuring that every team member had verified their primary and secondary weapons were loaded, secured, and ready for immediate use. The responses came back in sequence, professional confirmations that carried the weight of lives depending on split-second reactions when contact was made with enemy forces. The helicopter crew chief signaled for boarding, his hand gestures visible despite the driving rain that reduced visibility to mere meters. The team moved with practiced efficiency, settling into positions that balanced tactical considerations with aircraft weight distribution. Each operator conducted personal ritual preparations, checking equipment one final time, reviewing mission objectives, and making the mental transition from preparation to execution. 5 minutes to insertion, the pilot announced over the aircraft's internal communication system. His voice carried the calm professionalism of someone who'd flown similar missions in conditions that challenged every skill he'd developed over years of special operations support. Tonight's weather was beyond normal parameters, but not beyond his capabilities. Torres used the 5 minutes to conduct final mental rehearsal of the mission timeline, visualizing each phase from insertion through extraction. The compound layout was memorized, contingency plans were established, and each team member's role was clearly defined. Success would depend on precise execution of a plan that allowed no room for improvisation. Above them, barely visible through the storm clouds, Captain Kestrel's A-10 maintained station in weather conditions that would have grounded less experienced pilots. Her aircraft was configured for close air support in electronic warfare environments, carrying ordnance specifically selected for precision engagement in close proximity to friendly forces. The radio crackled with her voice, professional and calm despite flying in conditions that pushed the boundaries of aircraft capabilities. Ground team, this is Venom. I have visual on insertion point and am prepared to provide close air support as briefed. Weather conditions are challenging but manageable. The transmission carried confidence that provided reassurance to operators preparing to enter hostile territory. Copy, Venom, Torres responded. Appreciate the cover. See you on the other side. It was military shorthand for mutual respect between professionals who understood that success depended on each person executing their role with precision that left no room for error. The helicopter began its descent toward the insertion point, a clearing approximately 2 kilometers from the target compound. The landing zone had been selected for tactical advantages, concealment from enemy observation, multiple approach routes to the target, and extraction possibilities if the mission parameters changed. But like everything else about Operation Nightfall, the LZ carried risks that pushed beyond standard operating procedures. Turbulence from the storm buffeted the aircraft as it descended through cloud layers that reduced visibility to nearly zero. The pilots relied on instruments and night vision systems that provided artificial awareness of terrain features invisible to the naked eye. Landing in these conditions required skills that separated special operations aviators from their conventional counterparts. 30 seconds, the crew chief announced, preparing for a landing that would test every system on the aircraft. The LZ was small, surrounded by trees that created wind shear patterns capable of slamming helicopters into the ground without warning. Success required precise timing, perfect communication between pilots, and a little bit of luck that couldn't be predicted or controlled. The aircraft touched down with mechanical precision despite conditions that would have challenged the most experienced crew. Engines remained at flight power, ready for immediate departure if tactical conditions required rapid extraction. The crew chief's hand signals indicated 30 seconds on the ground, enough time for the operators to disembark, but not enough for enemy forces to organize effective response if their insertion had been detected. Torres led his team off the aircraft with movements that demonstrated years of tactical training. Each operator moved to predetermined positions, establishing security perimeters while conducting immediate assessment of their surroundings. The storm provided acoustic cover for their insertion, but it also masked sounds that might indicate enemy presence or movement. The helicopter lifted off immediately, disappearing into the storm clouds with minimal noise signature. Within seconds, the Special Operations Team was alone in hostile territory, relying on training, equipment, and mutual trust to complete a mission that existed at the very edge of what was possible. 2 kilometers away, the target compound appeared as a cluster of lights barely visible through the driving rain. Intelligence photographs and satellite imagery provided detailed knowledge of the facility's layout, but every operator understood that pictures couldn't capture the reality of defensive positions designed to kill anyone attempting unauthorized entry. Venom, ground team, Tor spoke quietly into his radio. Insertion complete. Beginning movement to target. The transmission was brief and professional, carrying information necessary for air support coordination while maintaining communication security in an environment where electronic signatures could be detected and targeted. Above them, Captain Kestrel acknowledged the transmission while conducting her own assessment of tactical conditions. The storm was intensifying, creating flight conditions that pushed her aircraft and her skills to their absolute limits. But it also provided cover that made her nearly invisible to enemy radar and acoustic detection systems. The next 15 minutes would determine whether Operation Nightfall succeeded in capturing intelligence that could save American lives, or became another classified failure that would be buried in files that officially didn't exist. Either way, 8 people had committed to a mission that would test everything they'd learned about warfare, courage, and the prices that freedom sometimes demanded. The Special Operations Team moved through terrain that seemed designed to test every skill they developed through years of training in hostile environments. Dense vegetation provided concealment, but also masked potential threats, while the storm created conditions that challenged navigation, communication, and basic movement across ground that was rapidly becoming saturated with runoff from the heavy rainfall. Staff Sergeant Volkov took point, her night vision equipment providing artificial awareness of obstacles and potential defensive positions. The modified rifle in her hands was configured for precision engagement at ranges up to 800 meters, but visibility conditions meant most encounters would occur at distances measured in tens of meters rather than hundreds. Behind her, the team moved in tactical formation that balanced speed with security, each operator maintaining visual contact with teammates while scanning assigned sectors for threats that might not be visible until engagement was unavoidable. The compound's defensive positions were designed to channel attacking forces into predetermined kill zones, but intelligence couldn't predict where those zones might be positioned along their approach route. Movement 2 o'clock, Volkov whispered into her radio, indicating potential activity near what appeared to be an abandoned building approximately 300 meters from their position. The structure wasn't shown on any of their maps, suggesting either intelligence oversight or recent construction designed to enhance defensive capabilities. Tors processed the information while continuing movement toward the target compound. Unknown structures could indicate anything from innocent civilian activity to advanced defensive positions equipped with automatic weapons. The mission timeline didn't allow for detailed reconnaissance, but moving forward without assessment could result in walking into prepared ambush positions. "Hold position," he ordered quietly. "Venom, ground team. Request reconnaissance of structure bearing 045 degrees from our position, approximately 300 meters. The request would require Kestrel to conduct low-level observation in weather conditions that made precision flying extremely dangerous." The response came back immediately. "Ground team, conducting reconnaissance run. Stand by." Above them, barely visible through the storm clouds, Kestrel's A-10 began a descent that would bring her aircraft within range of enemy weapons, but provide visual assessment of potential threats to the ground team. Her aircraft appeared briefly through breaks in the cloud cover, its distinctive silhouette barely visible against the storm-darkened sky. The sound of twin engines was masked by wind and rain, making her nearly invisible to acoustic detection systems. But visual observation revealed details that couldn't be captured through satellite imagery or electronic surveillance. Ground team, negative activity at target building. Structure appears abandoned, no heat signatures, no electronic emissions, Kestrel reported after completing her reconnaissance pass. Continue movement to primary objective. Be advised, I'm observing increased activity at the compound, multiple personnel moving between buildings. The intelligence added urgency to their mission timeline. Increased activity could indicate preparation for the high-value targets movement, or it could suggest awareness of the approaching special operations team. Either possibility required accelerated execution of mission objectives before tactical advantages were lost to enemy preparation. TORS signaled for continued movement, accepting the calculated risk that came with operating in territory where every decision could determine success or failure. The team resumed tactical movement toward the compound, each operator maintaining awareness of changing conditions while focusing on individual responsibilities that contributed to collective mission success. 200 meters from the target compound, they encountered the first defensive position that had been invisible in satellite imagery, a camouflaged observation post equipped with electronic surveillance systems and communication equipment that could coordinate defensive responses across the entire facility. The position was occupied by at least 2 personnel, but their exact capabilities remained unknown. The discovery validated Captain Kestrel's warnings about intelligence limitations and defensive preparations that exceeded official assessments. The compound wasn't just a fortified position. It was a sophisticated defensive complex designed to detect, engage, and eliminate attacking forces before they could reach primary objectives. Volkov studied the observation post through her rifle scope, identifying targets while